Like and follow if you love horror. When you're ready, honey child, but for now, take your time and let it out. There was always something strangely disarming about Joe Jack, even to complete strangers. Thanks, I'm not usually so, the teller cleared her throat. No need to explain, Joe Jack has seen many a teary eye in his line of work. He smiled, a disturbingly crooked line of otherwise pearly white teeth. Now, if you can summon the Constitution to tell me about your boss. Mr. Lang was a bit rigid, and I think maybe a little OCD, but he was such a nice guy and a loving husband. Why would anyone do this? She folded her hands and slumped, shaking her head slightly. Don't worry too much about the whys. I'll worry about that. Just let me know the whosies and the whatsies as you can. Perhaps what was so disarming about Joe Jack was his inviting southern attitude. Miranda opened one eye, watching Joe Jack work. She knew from experience that at least 60% of his ignorant shtick was just that. He might have been uneducated, but with no sense of propriety, but he was sharp as a tack. He was in a particularly good mood that day. He was giddier than I'd ever seen him, like he just won the lotto or a free cruise to the Bahamas, she explained. Did y'all ask him what happened to make him so chipper? Joe Jack leaned in. He mentioned something about winning a bid at an auction. She dove into her memory of that day as deeply as she could, but only found herself confused, as though something had come in to obscure her memories. Now, did Mr. Lang happen to talk about the meeting anyone there, or maybe a rival he was in a bidding contest against? Joe Jack smiled warmly. No, but he said he had won the bid for criminally little money, she added. He kept saying they just didn't know what he had. Did he mention what it was they happened to have? Joe Jack scribbled a few things into his notepad. To anyone who might see it other than Joe Jack, it simply read, Giddy, won at auction, didn't know what they had. I'm sorry, no, but I can give you the address of the auction hall. I had to Google it for him. She smiled back, appreciative of Joe Jack's warmness. Well, ma'am, that would be just perfect, he said, showing the teller on her way. When he turned to look at Miranda, her back was still towards him, hands tracing an empty safe deposit box. He walked up casually, though a bit excited he'd made a break, and had a sort of swagger to him. He cleared his throat to get her attention. Agent Coolidge, she said, still not turning around. I found something, ma'am, he said, trying to force his voice to be deep and commanding. I unfortunately have not. Miranda was perplexed and uncomfortable that she just couldn't identify what her senses were nagging at. The box had no prints, no magic residue. It didn't even have the smell of leather or rubber from gloves. It was as if the box had opened itself and the object simply popped out. Could it be an animated doll? That seemed unlikely, as even a doll would leave fibers. Strangely, the smell from the box was like an old discharged firework. Maybe the toy was an old model rocket. Maybe it just flew out of the box. She shook her head and turned around to face Joe Jack. He had a cocky sort of smile. What did you find out? She asked simply. Seems Mr. Harold Lang had himself a little success at a local auction house. Won him some sort of prize find. Joe Jack beamed his shark-like toothy grin. The toy from the box, no doubt, she said dismissively. She didn't mean to dismiss Joe Jack's work, but he was just confirming what she already assumed. Whoever killed him did it just because of this toy. He must have won it at the estate auction. The UP might have gone bankrupt, lost the asset in liquidation, and killed the bank manager to get it back. She went over the video footage from that night in her head. The UP follows him. He comes here after hours to claim his prize. The UP confronts him outside. He tries to flee into the vault for safety, and the UP uses some sort of ability to get into the vault, hang the manager 12 feet up, and get the toy out without opening the vault. All right, follow me here. A vampire, Joe Jack suggested. The toy is an antique and expensive. Vampires struggle with old assets from their history as they lose their humanity over time. He mists under the vault door, levitates the man to the light cage to hang him, opens the box with telekinesis, then mists back out the door. Miranda wondered if Joe Jack had ever encountered a real vampire before, or if he was quoting powers he'd seen in movies. If it was a vampire, I'd smell it. She looked over the seams of the vault, and even mist wouldn't get through that airtight seal. Teleportation would cause a residue, as would apportation. Shadow magic. Joe Jack snapped his fingers. Very hard to detect. Miranda lifted her phone. Her eyes scanned the readout of information as it scanned the ley lines, then grunted and shook her head. It's possible, but to be frank, whatever magic was used was already dissipated. Shadow magic would leave an impression. The ley lines were touched, but not strong enough to really help us much here. Nothing's perfect, and even magic has workarounds to hide it. He made a solid point, confessing that he was no simpleton. It was always a trick. Joe Jack was terrible at a lot of things, but when those areas he understood, he was some kind of a prodigy. That may explain the uncomfortable feeling I have. She found herself strangely proud of her uncanny agent. He might not have been great at detective work, but not every tool in the shed had to be sharp. At that point, the bank teller returned with the address for the auction hall. Joe Jack stepped in front of Miranda before she could handle the young woman. The last thing anyone who was freaked out needed was her brusque manner of sending them into another weeping fit. Miranda watched with weary bemusement as he did his sweet consolatory best friend act again. When he got the address. Minutes later, they were back in Miranda's car heading for the auction house. Joe Jack? Miranda asked, the resounding silence of Miranda's no music, no work, conversation rules shattered by her voice. Yes'm? He ringed his hand slightly around the notepad. Why were you in San Antonio? Her eyes glanced at him over the side and scanned him up and down. He squirmed a little in his seat, suddenly displaying a nervousness and self-consciousness that was completely at odds with Joe Jack, she knew. There was a show tonight. I was in town for a show. He continued to shift. Miranda could smell the lie. Joe Jack was allowed his private life, of course, but she deeply disliked being lied to. Who's playing? Oh, no, I mean, it's not that kind of show. It's performance stuff. Joe was a terrible liar, which made the strange charismatic ease in which he dealt with all people the more impressive. You expect me to believe that you're going to a play, Joe Jack, or a poetry reading. Fine, who's performing? Joe Jack struggled and mumbled something under his breath. Who? Me, all right. Dang it, I'm performing, okay? It's me. It's just an amateur night at the Heat, and some of my friends talked me into it, okay? So just leave it. Miranda wasn't speechless to hear Joe Jack was going to take in his Slayer cover band on stage for some Battle of the Bands bullshit, but she was shocked into silence by how defensive he was. She could almost smell his nervousness at that point. She dropped the subject and made a note to check in on it for later. For now, they would meet the rest of the team at the auction house. The Finest Things Auction House, San Antonio, Texas. Robert followed the pull that he felt deep in his gut. He hadn't been fast enough at the bank, and Elby had escaped him. He moved now, less confused than he had been when he first left the hospital, but still was in a bit of a daze. In the peripheral, he was aware the world was different. He was aware time was divided into two parts. On one side, things were familiar, and he had been a young man with a future he was willing to throw away. On the other side, he had exited the hospital and the future was here. But it was warped.